Good morning. We are here to discuss Shavuos. And on Shavuos, we have the custom of reading Megillas Rus. So we will be discussing Shavuos and Megillas Rus. The title for today's class is Discovering Your Purpose and Conversion, Adapting to Reality. This month, the month of Sivan, the classes are sponsored by Rabbi Aharon and Becky Asaraf for the merit of a refuah shalema for Baruch Yoshua Yisrael ben Sima, who is an awesome, incredible man and very important person in our community. And we certainly join in the prayers for refuah shalema, as well as the merit of our Torah learning to be for refuah shalema. It's really so difficult when our greatest people are suffering such serious illnesses, and our hearts go out to the entire family. We feel very, very close to them and wish nothing but a good health and speedy recovery, and all good for all of the members of the family. This week's classes are also sponsored for the benefit of Refuah Shlema for Peril Sasha Bas Merel Rivka and Binyamin ben Lillian Lily and all Chole Yisrael. So Shavuos is a very important Yom Tov. It's one of the Shalosh Regalim. And even though it's in Eretz Yisrael only one day, and here in Chutz La'aretz we celebrate it as 2 days, it's one of the three major festivals. So we need to realize that and try to understand its mammoth significance in light of the fact that, number one, it's much shorter than our other major holidays, and number two, it has no defining mitzvos that really are kind of cluing us in to what the holiday is all about. The Seforno actually learns that the word Atzeres, which is the Talmud's language of referring to Shavuos, Seforno learns that Atzeres is a time of tremendous kind of meditation, introspection, like a removal from the rest of the world, and intently focusing on our relationship with Hashem. And of course, being 7 sevens and the number 50 is definitely, as we know from Shemitah and Yovel and the concept of the number 50 in general, that's very closely connected with Hashem. But today I'm going to try to give us some kind of practical mindsets that we should be undertaking for the holiday of Shavuos, meaning as a way to understand what we're supposed to learn from it, and then hopefully how to apply it to our lives as well. Now, this custom of reading Megillas Rus on Shavuos, and one of the reasons we're not discussing a Parsha is because this week we do not advance a Parsha. In Eretz Yisrael, they actually do advance a Parsha this week because Shavuos being Thursday night, Friday comes Shabbos, and it's, so to speak, a regular Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael, so they advance in the Torah reading. For us, it's the second day of Yom Tov, and we do not advance a Parsha on Yom Tov, even when it's just, so to speak, just the second day of Yom Tov Sheni. So we're not discussing a Torah Parsha this week, but of course we're always discussing Torah. So the idea of reading Megillas Rus on Shavuos needs great explanation. Among the common answers given as to why we read Shavuos on Rus, on Shavuos, is because it happened in the harvest season, because Rus is talking about gathering the grains and entering the fields of her relative Boaz. That's what you would say is a tenuous connection at best, because, okay, so there are different seasons and it happened to be at that time. Another connection that is given is because David HaMelech dies on Shavuos, and David HaMelech is the concluding sentence of Megillas Rus. In fact, the last word in the Megillah is David, as if to say that the whole Rus story is leading to the emergence of David HaMelech, and of course, as we know, from there comes the Mashiach as well. And what's the connection between that and Shavuos? Apparently that David HaMelech died on Shavuos, which is, again, a tenuous connection at best. So we really want to understand in a much deeper way what's the point of reading Megillas Rus on Shavuos. Now, we're going to ask three overarching questions on the story. But first, we're going to outline the story, and we're going to suggest that it would make a lot more sense if the essence of the story could be connected in a very deep way to the holiday of Shavuos. That would be mentally and intellectually satisfying. So what is the essence of the story? The essence of the story is that there is a family with the characters of Elimelech, Naomi, Machlon, and Chilion that leave Eretz Yisrael to go settle in the fields of Moab. And when they do that, they lose all their money. Machlon and Chilion, after the death of their father Elimelech, die. After the death of the father Elimelech, they themselves marry Moabite women, and that's the language in the Megillah. Vayis'u lahem nashim Moavios. They married for themselves nashim, women that were Moavios, Moabites. One was called Arpa, and one was called Rus. And then the Megillah describes how Machlon and Chilion themselves also die, and again, along with their possessions, losing their possessions first, and then they're dying. And then Naomi gets up with her daughters-in-law to return to Eretz Yisrael, because Naomi had heard that in Eretz Yisrael there are actually there's a sort of a cessation to the famine, because Hashem has provided sustenance, bread, to his nation in Eretz Yisrael. So then when Naomi gets up, we have the famous conversation where Naomi says, daughters-in-law, guys, what are you waiting for? That I'm going to have children? I'm not going to have children that you'll be able to marry. And therefore, go back each one to the mother's house. And ultimately, Arpa is convinced, even though they had started already going on the way to Eretz Yisrael, and Arpa goes back to her father's house. And at that point, Naomi says to Rus, look, behold, your sister-in-law has returned to her nation and to her gods. Go follow after your sister-in-law, which is an astonishing statement, because it sounds like Naomi is even encouraging that Rus should go back and follow in the idolatrous ways of her sister-in-law. Well, of course, we know Rus does not acquiesce to Naomi's kind of declaration or demand, and Rus stays with Naomi, and Rus says, do not provoke me to leave you, to return, to turn away from you, because wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lie down, I will lie down. Your nation is my nation. Your God is my God. Wherever you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. And this is what Hashem should do to keep us together, because the only thing that will separate us is death. That's the famous declaration of Rus. So, in the end of the story, they go back, and Naomi eventually acknowledges the relative Boaz as being somebody important in their lives. Rus strikes up a connection with Boaz by gathering grains in his field, and Naomi eventually suggests to Rus that she should offer herself to Boaz in order to have redemption for her husband's estates, and that's the word that the Megillah uses, redemption for the real estate, as well as have children, to establish a legacy for the dead husband Machlon. And that's what happens. Rus makes that offering in the middle of the night, and Boaz is, kind of doesn't know what to do. But then Boaz says, don't worry, we'll take care of everything. Tomorrow we'll speak to the Redeemer, and if he won't redeem you, I'll redeem you. And that's what happens. And according to the rest of the sentences, Rus and Boaz do get married. According to the Midrash, after that first night together, Boaz actually dies, but nonetheless, they produce a child, and then a grandchild, and a great-grandchild, and that ends up being David HaMelech. Okay, so that's the story. What does that have to do with Shavuos? The essence of the story is one of the relationships of this family with these Moabite women, that then one of them turns away and one of them stays, and then they go through this process of kind of identifying the relatives of the dead members of the family of the Melech, Machlon, and Chilion, and one of those relatives, by the name of Boaz, steps in to take care of establishing a legacy and taking care of the properties of the now deceased members, Elimelech, Machlon, and Chilion. What does that have to do with Shavuos? Right, that's the question. Now, a much more overarching question that's profound and speaks to the kind of the kishkas, right, the internal workings of the story, is that the whole concept that there is a reason for an obligation, which is what it seems like in the Megillah, that there's an obligation that somebody from Elimelech's family should marry Rus, and take care of the real estate and redeem it, which is the language in the Chumash redeeming property, it's a language in the Megillah redeeming property, and redeeming the whole situation is astonishing. That whole idea is literally astonishing. Why? Because number one, the only concept that we have of marrying relatives of dead relatives are brothers. A brother has a requirement, it's called yibum, to marry the wife of a brother of his that died without children. That's literally the only halachic basis in the Torah. It comes in Parshas Kiseitze, and the only person that's obligated to marry a dead relative is a surviving brother. And this is not the situation here. At best, Boaz is a cousin, Nephew to Elimelech. He is not a brother. And the closer redeemer is an uncle. He's not a brother. And in Torah law, if he really was an uncle, he would not be allowed to marry Rus, because there only is Yibum when it's a brother. So the whole idea that all these people, and then by all these people I mean Naomi, Rus, Boaz, the redeemers, the based in the court that is watching the ultimate redemption process and the decision of ultimately Boaz to redeem and to marry Rus, and all the people that are in on this, it's an exercise in the air, because there really is no halachic basis to do this. I'm not saying it's not allowed. It was allowed because technically there's nothing wrong with Rus marrying a cousin. That's okay. A cousin through a dead husband. That's okay. But there's no reason. There's no what's the big impetus to do this story? And it sounds like it's very important. But even kind of more difficult than that is the essential question. And again, this is into the kishkas of the story. Was the marriage between Rus and Machlon a legitimate marriage? If Rus is indeed a non-Jewish woman, so that's not a marriage. A Jew, no matter what kiddushin or ceremony they perform, cannot get married. It doesn't work. If they try to get married, they do everything that is quote unquote part of marriage. It doesn't actually work that they become married. It's the kiddushin, the marriage does not take effect. So they're not even married. Unless you think that that's sort of not the prevailing opinion, it absolutely is the prevailing opinion. In the Midrash, which you'll see in the transcript, Rabbi Meir says that they did not convert them, they did not put them into the mikvah, they were not converted. Straight out, Rabbi Meir, Atana, says that. The Targum of the Megillah, which is given to Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, the Tana, which is Ruach HaKodesh, the whole world shook when he wrote his translation, right? Not married, not good. They were not Jewish, not Jewish. Rashi, they were not Jewish. Rashi, Beferish on the Megillah. Okay. Now you do have a different opinion, which is the Zohar Chadash, which I'm not going to get into today, which is the more comfortable opinion, is that they sort of converted, and later it was determined if it was a real conversion, but that's not the prevailing opinion. So today we are going to discuss the prevailing opinion, but now that we know that that's the prevailing opinion, now all the more so there's no concept of marrying the dead relative, because the first marriage was not a marriage. So the whole thing makes no sense, seemingly. It's a big, big problem, and as far as I know, I have yet to see anybody who really addresses this question head on, instead of just trying to somehow make sense out of the Zohar Chadash and think that they were sort of partially converted and then something happened later, and that becomes its own explanation. But even that doesn't help so much, because according to the Zohar Chadash or anyone, that even if you want to say it was a legitimate marriage, there's still no halachic basis of requirement that Boaz has to marry Rus or the closer redeemer has to marry. There's zero halachic basis. So what are we talking about? And then a question that we mentioned in the Friday shir, which is also available, is as follows: at the end of the Rus story, when Naomi suggests to Rus, I care about you, I care about your future. Here's what you should do: you should go secretly to Boaz, all dressed up and all washed and perfumed, literally perfumed, and go in the middle of the night and make sure nobody sees, and lie by his feet and he'll tell you what you should do. And it's all that we can do from going wink, 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 wink. That seems to be literally the most inappropriate imaginable thing that not only is Naomi advocating, but Rus is doing, the Megillah is recording, and Boaz refers to as a tremendous chesed that Rus is doing because she's offering herself to the old octogenarian Boaz instead of going after a younger man. Now, the more dignified and seemingly correct thing to do would be for Naomi, either directly or indirectly, to say to Boaz, let's make a shidduch. You should redeem the property. You should get married to the relative of, the long lost relative that died, marry his wife. This is the right thing to do. Let it be a very above board discussion with a l'chaim and kichel, and make the deal happen. So it's bizarre that the way that it goes down, commentary understand that Boaz was a great strength on the part of Boaz. We're going to speak to the other. I'm giving them is really.
You're on mute.
Sorry, we had a momentary glitch, blip, but we're back, so everybody can hear me okay? Okay, excellent. So what I'd like to do is make the following kind of suggestion philosophically, and it's very, very important because it speaks to everything in our lives. The entire essential message of Megillas Rus is that relationships are created primarily through three components that have nothing to do with genetics. That's the point. The Megillah is telling us that relationships are real. If you want, spell relationship now, R-E-L, relationship. Relationship. Relationships are reality. And they do not primarily depend on being blood relatives. That's the big chiddush of the entire Megillas Rus. So what are the three components that I'm suggesting are the essence of a relationship? Number one is attachment. Attachment means that ideally there's a mutual attachment where both sides are seeking connection to one another through giving to one another. And this attachment seeking should be generated by tremendous admiration and respect for the other. Literally, the ideal is where there are paradigms of being awestruck by the greatness of the other. That's like a great foundation that explains the way that a woman is supposed to treat her husband like a king and the husband is supposed to treat his wife like a queen, right? There should be a tremendous admiration and respect and appreciation for the other. That's one element of attachment in a relationship that doesn't have to only apply to husband and wife, but husband and wife is the most formalized form of relationship choosing, as opposed to being blood relatives, right? Because we get married to people to whom we are not related. Number two is commitment. Commitment means the attitude that both sides do what is necessary to live life together in meaningful ways by sharing life experiences together. And this is reflected in the shouldering of life's experiences, right? You experience them together and all the burdens and all the things that go along with that. I'm calling that commitment. And number three is responsibility. Responsibility means not just that we do what's necessary to live life together, but it's a permanent undertaking where each party is doing everything necessary to ensure that each party is fulfilling their life's purpose. This means that each person is doing all that they can to assist one another in achieving both their individual and combined purpose. That's what a relationship is. A relationship is about the way that a person attaches commits and takes responsibility for each other and for everything that is important in the other one's life and in their collective lives. Now, secondary to this kind of a relationship of these primary principles is an aspect of a genetic blood relationship. And once a person chooses to get married, so now there's a formalized relationship, but really marriage is mostly a way of concretizing these three things in the ultimate form of being permanently financially obligated and morally obligated. But really, these three components can exist in any relationship and should exist in every close relationship. Now, blood relationships often have the elements of these above components, but they don't always, right? And, sometimes it's baked in because the people feel this way and they are committed, they are attached, they are responsible. And other times it's okay, he's my uncle, he's my cousin, my brother, even my spouse, but I don't necessarily have these three components built into the relationship because we haven't attached and committed and taken responsibility for the other. Now, the reason that these primary ingredients, as this is critical for the philosophical component of our discussion, the reason that these three primary ingredients are the most important components and they are what makes the relationship real is because Hashem, and we're going to see this explicitly in the Medrash today, Hashem provides us.
Everybody can hear. I can't hear at all.
You can't hear me?
I do.
Okay.
I think it's a connection.
I do.
Okay. So the reason that these three components are the most important is because since Hashem provides relationships to us, we're going to see this explicitly, as a means of achieving our purpose, both individually and collectively, these are the three things that are necessary to achieve purpose. You need to have the attachment, you need to have the commitment, and you need to undertake the responsibility. Hashem created all human beings for a purpose. Every human being is meant to connect with Hashem and help the world to connect with Hashem in their own unique ways that they do that as people. Ultimately, only the Jewish nation undertook the responsibility of this mission. And guess when that happened? Shavu'os. That's when it happened. On Shavu'os, we took the responsibility to be Hashem's nation, to get ourselves close to Him and to bring the whole world close to Him. That's what it means. You shall be for me a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation. And that's what it means that we formally committed to this with Hashem, and therefore we got married to Hashem on Shavuos. That's when it happened. Now, so because marriage is the ultimate concretization of attachment, commitment, and responsibility, that's what happened at Har Sinai with us and Hashem. What we learn from the entire Megillas Rus is that that's the essence of a relationship. So let's go back. They were not married. There was no marriage. She's not Jewish. He, they, Machlon Chilyon, were Jewish. It's not a marriage. But it was a real relationship because they attached and they committed and they took responsibility from the beginning. That includes Arpa, as we'll see in a moment. And that's why, for the entire Megillah, she's called a daughter-in-law. Let's pretend for a second that it was a real marriage and the husband died. It's actually not a daughter-in-law anymore. I mean, you might want to say that. And in the Torah, there are certain halachas, but not really a daughter-in-law. There's no in-law anymore. They're not married. He's gone, right? Especially where there are no children. What is it really? But if you really built the relationship on that basis and you had these primary components, then it's a real relationship that lives on after the marriage. Now, we learn directly from this story that marriage is the ultimate form of relationship that we're describing. How do we know it from the story? So the Medrash says it, the Gemara says it, says that Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. So the Gemara asks, why does it say the husband of Naomi? Specifically to teach you that a husband only dies to his wife. That's what the Gemara says. Well, what does that mean? I remember speaking about this at Binyamin Ross's Shloshim. I remember speaking about this Gemara that many years ago. That's what the Gemara says. What does that mean? A father doesn't die to his children? What do you mean? A husband dies only to the wife? Because the two people that have to live life together and shoulder all the responsibilities of life together and are committed to making sure that the other one fulfills their mission and purpose is only the spouse. That doesn't mean you can't have it in other relationships, but that is what the formal commitment of marriage means. And so the most decapitating of that fulfillment is when one member of the spousal relationship dies, which is the Gemara says the same thing is true for a woman. When a woman dies, she only dies to her husband, and we learned that out from Yaakov and Rachel. Mesa alai Rachel. Rachel died on me. That's what Yaakov says. She was the main one to help him fulfill his mission. She's the mainstay of the house, and guess what? That's also in Megillas Rus. At the end of the story, it says that just like Rachel and Leah built the house of Yisrael, so too Rus and Naomi are doing that. That's the end of the Megillah. Because they are the ones, Rachel was the main one. In this case, it's Rus and Naomi that are bringing about the establishment of the legacy of Machlon and Chilion and ultimately Elimelech. So this is not a coincidence that we learn this from Megillas Rus, right? It's telling you specifically that our relationship with Hashem is built primarily on these three components as well. And nobody embodies the commitment, the attachment, and the responsibility better than a convert. That's what's happening when a person converts to Torah Judaism and to the Jewish people. What a person is converting to is to attach, to become committed, and be fully responsible for Hashem's mission in the world. And that's why a convert is so important. And that should be every from birth person's relationship with the Torah as well. But sometimes, it's like we feel like we're blood related and, we can't lose it anyway. So like we take it for granted and we don't really get involved in the thinking. Are we really attaching? Are we really committed? Are we really responsible? But that's what we're supposed to learn from Megillas Rus. We're supposed to have that same choosing of attachment and commitment and responsibility, just like a convert. Now, here's an incredible thing also in the Medrash Rabbah and Rus, and it will be, God willing, in the transcript. Hashem said, I'm going to paraphrase it. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yotzadok, Hashem brings groups of people to the world. Groups and groups Hashem brings to the world. Just like Hashem brings kingdoms to the world, Hashem brings cohorts of people to the world. And you should know that no group impinges on the territory of another group. Every group has their space. They have their time. And if ever one of the members of the group die, the whole group should be worried. That's what the Medrash says. Because they're in it together. And my explanation is because they have a mission to achieve together. As part of your group, you have a purpose to achieve. Whether it's your shul, your learning group, your class, your committee for the institution of whatever your group is, it's your group with a specific purpose and a mission that you need to ultimately achieve. And so much so that this very same Medrash goes on to say, I never called my wife, I called her my home. I never called my ox, I called it my food, my supply, basically, my parnasa. Because you have to understand that everything that you have in your life is for a purpose. Your wife is your wife, but the purpose is to build a home. And a home means your children and a posterity. Not just your wife. Every person that's in our lives, that's in our group, is to help us and us to help them to fulfill their mission, because that's what a real relationship is. And you understand that Hashem is orchestrating that. You don't happen to have friends. You don't happen to live in a community. You don't happen to be born into your family. Hashem is orchestrating it. Hashem brings these groups to the world in a unit, not to impinge on another unit. So, here we have Elimelech and Machlon and Chilion leaving their unit. They leave Eretz Yisrael. They are literally destroying their own mission and other people's ability to fulfill that mission. And Elimelech dies after losing money. And Machlon and Chilion go a step further. They marry Moabite women. And according to the prevailing opinion, not Jewish. They're destroying their legacy. But why did Arpa and Rus marry Machlon and Chilion? In other words, simple way to put it, were Machlon and Chilion intermarrying so that they could become Moabite? Or did Rus and Orpah marry them so that they could become Jewish? The answer is for sure that they could become Jewish. And we know that because they were no longer part of their father's house, their mother's house, or doing idolatry. That's beferish in the psukim. So that means they're attaching to the Jewish people through Machlon and Chilion and Naami and Elimelech, who had at that point died. But that family. And they did that with real commitment, attachment, and responsibility. That's how they did that. Because even though they weren't married, it says that they got married. And even though they weren't relatives, it says mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. That's the way they dealt with each other. And that's real. It's so real that they all get up together, these three women, after the deaths of their husband. Why are they going with Naomi? What sense is it? That's what Naomi basically says after they start traveling together to Eretz Yisrael. What are you doing with me? I don't have any, you can't marry. What are you going to do? And Orpah says, you know something? You're right. I can't. It's not for me. But you know what's incredible? Is that Arpa is not merely saying, you know what, I can't go further. She's turning her back. For Arpa, this is about extricating from a real attachment, which is why her name is Arpa, because Arpa means oref, the back of the neck. That's what it means. She turned away from the reality relationship with Naomi and her attachment to the Jewish people. And that's why terrible things happen to her. It's so real that even though halakhically it's not real, she's considered to be literally destroying a real relationship and a real attachment, both to Naomi, to this family, and to the Jewish people. And so she turned her back. But Rus, the Chachamim say, is that Ro'eh, she saw the words of Naomi, which means that she saw the truth of what Naomi was saying. I see what you're saying. I see the truth in what you're saying. And she says it's not only that it's a real relationship and a real attachment, but this is what's true. The Torah is what's true. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you die, I will go. That is my reality. That's what Rus is saying. And as such, she's adapting herself to the reality rather than what most people do is, let me change the reality to fit my paradigm, which is what Arpa does. So the whole Megillah is specifically to tell us that real relationships with these components of attachment, commitment, and responsibility are only for the purpose of pursuing truth and fulfilling mission. That's the whole deal. That's what a convert is, but that's what a Jew is. Except that sometimes we Jews forget that. But that's what it means that we received the Torah on Mount Sinai. Well, now does it make sense that we read Rus on Shavuos? This is the essence of the story. The essence of the story is that we adapt to the truth and we commit and we attach and we that's why Hashem. So now, literally, we're saying there was no marriage, and there is no. It doesn't exist. That's true. And you hear about, hey, that husband Machlon, and she wanted to attach to the Jewish people, and everything that Naomi also represented and did for her and connected to her. You don't understand that Machlon made a major contribution? Rus is only here because of Machlon, Chilion, Elimelech, and Naomi. You're not going to give Machlon a legacy based on the fact that he brought Rus in and that established a real relationship with this obviously most incredible woman, Eishes Chayil. That's the language that the Megillah says, that Boaz says about her. She's literally the Eishes Chayil. and you're not going to give Machlon a legacy? What is wrong with you? I don't care that they're not blood related. That's the reality. That's what Boaz understands. And that's what redemption is all about. Let's understand it well. Redemption means I am lost and I am not on the path, nor do I have the ability to fulfill my life purpose. That's what it means. I'm in exile. I cannot fulfill my ultimate purpose and mission. And we as a Jewish people, as long as we're in exile, we can't fully establish the Malchus of Hashem and make the world understand Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. That's true. We have a purpose to get to there. Fine. So, Machlon and Chilion are literally in exile. And Elimelech, they have no future. The only way that their legacy and their purpose can be established is through redeeming them and taking them out of exile by giving their good contribution permanence through establishing a child through Rus. That is the most concrete establishment of their legacy possible, along with, of course, taking care of their property, their real estate. So, and this we spoke about, I'm going to conclude with this because we spoke about it in detail on Friday, but just to finish it for this year, what Naomi is orchestrating at the end of the story is a message to both Rus and Boaz that you guys are not what counts in the story. And in fact, if you look in the Megillah, that's why many of the pronouns that refer to Rus are said but not written. Like the word Eli doesn't exist. Rus has to make herself a non-entity because it's not about what's good for Rus, it's only about what's good for her dead husband. It's not about marriage, even though for sure marriage is the best way to continue and have children, no question. But what Boaz and Rus really have to commit to is that their whole union is only to give Machlon a legacy, which is why the mitzvah of Yibum is so hard to fulfill. A person has to literally have that intention. And that's why Ploni Almoni does not want to do it, because he does not want to give up from his own legacy to give someone else a legacy. So what Naomi is saying is, look, if all Boaz wants to do is have relations with you and see if you can procreate, fine. Is that the ideal? No. But that has to be the intention anyways, because it's not about you, Rus, having financial security. And even though Naomi says that I'm seeking manoach for you, I'm seeking comfort for you, I believe that what she's really saying is I'm seeking for you that you should know your established place in the Jewish people, which is by your relationship with Machlon. I want to give that a permanence. We need to give Machlon a permanence, and ultimately thereby Elimelech a permanence. And guess what? If Jews would only care about every Jew's legacy as much as they care about their own, Mashiach would be here. And that's why this leads to David HaMelech. And that's why it's called a chesed after a chesed. The whole Megillah talks about what a tremendous chesed this is. Because the truth is, Machlon and Chilion and Elimelech squandered their potential. They squandered the group that Hashem put them in. But a magic thing happened, that because they allowed Rus and Arpa to attach them with themselves as Jews, and they brought this great woman, Rus, into the equation, and she took that to the nth degree, they ultimately are responsible for bringing the Mashiach. But it's only through the chesed of Rus, it's only through the foresight of Naomi, it's only through the real relationships that they established of commitment and attachment and responsibility that ultimately leads to this incredible conclusion that they give birth to a child that ultimately leads to David HaMelech. So I think I answered the questions. I'll take any questions or comments if there are any. And if not, I wish everybody a beautiful, amazing Shavuos. We do learn all Shavuos night in the yeshiva, and we do learn Rus as well. My father always gave an all-night shir on Rus, and I undertook that several years back. And a lot of what I'm sharing today are things that we've worked out over these last many years of Shavuos, and I'm looking forward to new understandings in the Megillah as well, because when we understand it, we can finally truly, deeply understand the amazing gift that is the Yom Tov of Shavuos, that we get to attach to Hashem in these ways, and that the more that it's based on reality and not just because, our ancestors or what happened at Har Sinai, but that we're choosing the attachment to commitment and responsibility, we're choosing to live the mission, and we're understanding that everybody in our lives is important to that mission. That's how we begin to find our own purpose. I can take people through exercises offline to help even do that a little bit better. And with that, Be'ezus Hashem, we will all be able to bring the Mashiach. So, any questions or comments? Reminder to everybody, my father will also be speaking about Shavuos in a few minutes. Okay, a great Yom Tov, everyone.
You too.
Thank you.